In the sleepy winter town of Northhollow, where rooftops were sugared with snow and lanterns glowed even in the early afternoon, there stood an old wooden shop at the bend of Holly Street. Its windows were round like spectacles, its shingles crooked like a smile, and above the door hung a faded sign, Merrin's Toy Workshop, where joy is made by hand. For more than 50 years, this little shop had been the heart of Christmas in Northhollow. Children pressed their noses to its windows all December long, watching tiny trains puff across miniature tracks, wooden deer leap in place, and painted tops spin in dazzling circles. The air always smelled faintly of cedar, cinnamon, and magic, or at least something very much like it. But things had changed. It was now the 7th winter since the shop had lost its voice. No more tapping of chisels into wood. No more tink, tink, tink of metal gears being tightened. No more warm humming from the old Toymaker who once filled every corner with song. The workshop had fallen silent, and so had Elias Merrin, the Toymaker, inside the shop. Elias sat alone at his workbench, rubbing his thumb along a wooden horse he had carved weeks earlier. His hands, once nimble as sparrows, were stiff now. His fingers trembled when he held small tools. His wrists ached when he tried to turn screws. Even lifting a paintbrush left his knuckles thudding with dull pain. The toys that surrounded him, shelves full of wooden soldiers, porcelain dolls, marionettes, spinning tops, and stuffed winter animals, watched him in quiet sympathy. They remembered him as he used to be, a man who worked through the night with joy glowing in his eyes, a man who believed every toy carried a spark of Christmas magic, a man who left small gifts on porches for children who had none, a man whose workshop once glowed like a lantern in the heart of winter. But since his wife Mara passed away 3 Christmases ago, his hands had grown slower. His smile, once lit like a hearth, had dimmed into gentle embers. And though he still opened the shop each morning out of habit, he no longer had the strength to make new toys. Christmas had begun to feel like a ghost walking through the snow. Elias sighed and set the wooden horse aside. Outside, twilight gathered, brushing the frosted window panes with soft blue shadows. From the street came distant sounds of life, a wagon rattling over cobblestones, neighbors calling goodnight, children laughing somewhere near the town square. But even those sounds felt muted this year, as though muffled by the long creeping winter. Elias rubbed his hands together to warm them. The stovepipe in the corner crackled softly, offering thin heat. "I should close up for the night," he murmured to himself. His voice was barely more than a breath. He reached for his cane, bracing himself to stand, and then something unexpected happened. A sound. A tiny, gentle sound. A sound that didn't belong to the wind or the stove or the groaning beams of the old shop. Tap, 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 tap. Elias froze, turning slowly. Behind him, on a shelf lined with half-finished toys, a small wooden soldier, a toy he had carved many winters ago, had fallen sideways. Its painted eyes looked up at him as if startled. "That's strange," Elias whispered, walking over stiffly. "I thought I had placed you securely." He reached out to steady the soldier when... Tap! The wooden hand twitched. Elias's breath hitched. He stared. The soldier remained still, staring ahead with painted bravery. Elias blinked rapidly. "It must be the draft," he muttered. Though no draft had ever made a toy move on its own. He placed the soldier upright again, then he turned away. And that was when he heard it. A faint chorus-like hum, soft as the ring of a silver bell, delicate as the memory of music. It drifted from somewhere deep in the workshop, weaving between wooden horses, porcelain dolls, and music boxes like a secret trying to be heard. Elias stiffened. "No," he whispered. "Not that. Not again." The hum grew stronger, or rather, clearer. Not loud, never loud, but persistent, gentle, familiar. It was the sound of his workshop in the years when Mara still sat in the rocking chair by the fire, knitting socks for the little ones. The years when Elias would hum Christmas tunes while painting doll cheeks rosy. The years when the toys felt alive in their own small way. The hum moved through the air like a memory come home. Elias placed a hand on the workbench to steady himself. "This can't be," he whispered. Then very slowly he lifted his gaze toward the back of the workshop. There, atop the highest shelf, rested a toy he had never finished. A wooden nutcracker with emerald green paint, a half-carved smile, and buttons of shiny brass. It was the last toy he had begun before Mara fell ill. The last toy he worked on with joy in his hands, and the one he could never bring himself to finish after she passed. The nutcracker's eyes, simple painted dots, seemed to glimmer. Then its jaw moved only a fraction of an inch, but enough for Elias to drop his cane. "Good evening, Mr. Merrin." The voice was tiny, warm, crackling like a small log in a big fireplace. Elias's heart seemed to forget how to beat. The nutcracker nodded, stiffly, awkwardly, like a toy not used to its joints. "It's been rather quiet in here," it said kindly. We thought you might like some company." Elias stared, mouth opening and closing without sound. Then he whispered, "We?" He looked around the shop again. The wooden soldier on the lower shelf saluted with a tiny tremble. A porcelain doll blinked once, her eyes clicking softly. A little carved bird turned its head. A stuffed reindeer twitched one ear. In the still, snowy night of Holly Street, the toys of Merrin's workshop were waking up. And Christmas, after so many silent years, was beginning to breathe again. Chapter 2. When toys begin to whisper. For a long moment, Elias stood frozen in the center of his old workshop, surrounded by shelves that had suddenly become far less still than he'd ever imagined. The air hummed with a strange, delicate warmth, like the faint glow of a candle catching just before it burns steadily. The nutcracker, perched high on the shelf, cleared his tiny wooden throat. The sound was soft, but to Elias it felt as loud as a church bell. "You're pale, Mr. Merrin," the nutcracker said gently. His painted jaw clicked with each word. "Perhaps you should sit." Elias's knees didn't wait for permission. They folded beneath him, lowering him into the nearest chair. His heartbeat thumped in his ears. His breath came in shaky puffs of warm mist. "I'm dreaming," he whispered. "It's the cold, or the loneliness." His eyes darted around. "Toys don't talk. Toys don't move." "Usually no," said the wooden soldier politely, hopping down from the shelf with a clink of painted boots. "But tonight is rather special." "Exceptionally special," added the porcelain doll, smoothing the hem of her dress with prim, perfect hands. Her voice tinkled like a tiny bell. The reindeer plush gave a small snort and shook out its felt antlers. "Special indeed," it muttered, sounding sleepy but content. "Long overdue." Elias pressed a hand over his eyes. "This isn't real." A small fluttering sound made him look up. From the far side of the room, the carved wooden bird, its wings so delicate that Elias had once polished each feather with a sigh of pride, flew in a short, wobbly arc before landing on the table beside him. It tilted its head. "If this was a dream," the bird chirped softly, "would you feel your heart beating this fast?" Elias felt a shock of warmth through his chest. I don't understand," he whispered. "How long? Have you all been alive?" The Nutcracker tapped his brass buttons proudly. "Oh, we're not alive." "Not exactly. We don't breathe. We don't grow. We don't think the way humans think." The porcelain doll nodded, her painted lashes blinking. "But we awaken when the workshop calls for it." "And tonight," said the reindeer softly, "it called." Elias stared at them, bewildered. "I haven't called anything. I haven't had a spark of Christmas spirit in years." The bird hopped closer. "But your heart called, Mr. Merrin." The workshop fell quiet as that snow drifted beyond the windows. The crackle of the stove filled the silence. The golden glow of lanterns outside Holly Street softened the darkness. Elias swallowed thickly. "Why now?" The Nutcracker sighed, an oddly human sound coming from a painted jaw. "Because Christmas is fading in Northhollow, Mr. Merrin. You can feel it. Everyone can. The lights are dimmer, laughter quieter. The snow falls heavier, not softer." The soldier chimed in. "It isn't because people stopped believing." "No," the porcelain doll added, "it's because you stopped making toys." Elias lowered his gaze. His throat tightened painfully. "I can't," he whispered. "I tried. My hands. They don't work like they used to. My fingers tremble. My wrists ache. I drop tools. He swallowed. "I'm old." "And you are grieving," the reindeer murmured gently. At that, Elias shut his eyes. Mara's smile flashed vividly behind his eyelids. Her warm laugh, her hands on his, her gentle humming as she knitted by the fire. His heart ached in the shape of her absence. "I haven't made a toy since she died," he whispered. "I can barely hold a paintbrush without thinking of her." The toys fell silent, not out of fear or uncertainty, but out of respect. Then the Nutcracker climbed down carefully from his high shelf, landing with a tiny thud on the workbench below. He walked, click, 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 over to Elias and placed his wooden hand over the Toymaker's wrinkled fingers. "Mr. Merrin," he said softly, "she wouldn't have wanted you to stop." Elias looked up, tears threatening. The Nutcracker's painted eyes, those simple dots of ink, seemed to glow with something gentle, something real. "We know your hands are tired," he said. "We know they hurt. We know they can't do what they used to." The wooden soldier straightened proudly. "But that doesn't mean the workshop has to be silent." The doll curtsied. "That is why we woke tonight." The reindeer bowed its felt head. "To help you." Elias stared at them, stunned. "You help me? How could toys help? You are tiny, fragile." The bird flapped its wooden wings indignantly. "We are resourceful." Elias blinked. "But what could you possibly do?" The Nutcracker turned, lifted his chin with dignity and declared, "Everything you cannot." The other toys nodded. "We can sand wood you cannot grip. We can fetch tools you can't reach. We can sort nails and screws your fingers drop. We can paint fine lines where your hand trembles. We can stitch, polish, carve, adjust." The bird hopped excitedly. "We can do everything together." Elias shook his head in disbelief. "You're telling me," he whispered, "that you want to help me make toys again?" "Not just toys," the Nutcracker corrected. "Christmas." Elias's breath caught. Outside, the wind whistled softly. Snowflakes danced like tiny sparks drifting through moonlight. The workshop, his workshop, felt warmer than it had in years. "Please," the porcelain doll said gently, "let us help. You don't have to make the toys alone." Elias pressed a trembling hand to his heart. I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," the reindeer murmured. "Just believe in this one quiet moment." The Nutcracker extended his hand again. "Let us bring your workshop back to life." Elias looked at the outstretched hand, at the soldier's hopeful salute, at the doll's earnest smile, at the bird's expectant tilt of its head. Finally, slowly, he nodded. "Yes," he whispered, voice cracking. "Yes, let's bring Christmas back." The toys erupted into soft cheers, tiny, tinkling, clicking sounds that filled the workshop with warmth. The stove crackled louder, as if joining them. Outside, the lanterns on Holly Street flickered with a new kind of glow. And for the first time in many silent years, Elias Merrin's workshop felt like Christmas again. Chapter 3: A Workshop Wakes Again. Elias Merrin had always believed that the workshop had a heartbeat of its own. Not literally, of course. He wasn't that fanciful. But he'd always felt that when he carved wood or tightened gears, something like a pulse ran beneath the floorboards and through his tools. A warmth, a rhythm, a sense of purpose. For many winters now, that heartbeat had faded. But as the toys gathered around him, tiny faces lifted with earnest hope, Elias felt it again. A subtle thrum beneath the soles of his boots, a soft stirring in the air, as if the workshop had inhaled after a very long breath. He wiped his eyes with the sleeve of his sweater. The Nutcracker marched in a small circle, as if organizing troops. The wooden soldier adjusted his polished hat and stood at attention. The porcelain doll stretched her arms, her joints clicking delicately. The reindeer plush shook out tufts of felt snow caught in its fur, and the carved bird flew a small, excited loop overhead. Elias leaned on his cane. "I can't promise my hands will do much," he warned softly. "And we won't ask you to," the Nutcracker replied. "You guide," said the soldier. "We do." "You design," said the doll. "We create." "You dream," said the reindeer. "We build." "You start," chirped the bird. "And we finish." Elias chuckled, a sound rusty with disuse but warm. "Very well. But if we're to do this properly, we'll need to sort the workshop." He gestured to the clutter around them, drifts of sawdust, baskets of buttons, drawers of screws, paint jars half buried under scraps of cloth. The toys turned toward the room with a spark of determination. The Nutcracker nodded like a commander. "You heard the Toymaker. Positions." The toys scattered. The wooden soldier leapt from shelf to shelf, sorting nails and screws by size, dropping each type into old tin containers labeled in Elias's faded handwriting. The carved bird swooped between rafters, dusting cobwebs off beams with its tiny wings. The porcelain doll carried spools of thread with elegant precision, stacking them like colorful towers. The reindeer plush used its soft antlers to push larger tools back into their rightful drawers. Elias watched with a mixture of amazement and something that felt dangerously like hope. The workshop hummed. Literally. A faint melody drifted through the air, not from Elias's throat, but from the toys themselves. A soft, wordless tune that sounded like Christmas long forgotten. Elias found himself humming along. He hadn't hummed in years. After an hour, or perhaps longer, time seemed to melt in the workshop's warmth. The room glowed with a gentle order. The workbench was clear, tools hung neatly from their nails, shelves stood full but tidy. The Nutcracker placed his hands on his hips proudly. "Ready for creation, Mr. Merrin." Elias approached the bench with reverence. He opened a drawer and pulled out a small block of wood, smooth pine, the color of warm honey. His hands trembled. The Nutcracker noticed. "Let us begin with something simple," he suggested gently. "Something your hands remember well." Elias nodded. "A toy I made with Mara," he whispered. His voice softened like snowfall. "A doll." The porcelain doll gasped, delighted. "Oh, a companion." Elias chuckled. "Not quite like you, my dear." He placed the wood block gently on the workbench. The soldier fetched a tiny ruler. The bird hovered near with a feather-light brush. The reindeer nudged a scrap of velvet cloth his way. Elias took his carving knife, slowly, cautiously, and pressed it to the wood. His wrist trembled. Not much, but enough that the line went off course. He shut his eyes. "See, I can't." A tiny wooden hand rested on his. The Nutcracker looked up at him. "With us, you can." A second later, the porcelain doll gently steadied his other hand. Elias opened his eyes. He breathed. Then he carved again. This time, the toys guided the movement, barely, gently, like a whisper's worth of help. Enough for his hands to feel steady, enough for the knife to meet the wood smoothly. Shavings curled like ribbon. The scent of fresh pine filled the air. Elias carved the shape of a tiny face, 2 cheeks, a little chin. The curve of a smile. The soldier sanded the rough edges as soon as the knife lifted away. The bird blew away dust with a tiny flutter. The doll prepared the cloth for a dress. The reindeer sorted paintbrushes by thickness. It was teamwork in its purest form. And as the hours passed, the workshop's heartbeat grew stronger. When the doll was carved smooth, the toys helped paint her. The bird dabbed her eyes with delicate strokes. The soldier painted tiny shoes. The doll herself tied ribbons in the doll's new hair. The reindeer pushed a small piece of red cloth onto the table, perfect for a scarf. When they finished, Elias lifted the new doll in trembling hands. A small tear rolled down his cheek. "Mara would have loved her," he whispered. The Nutcracker laid a hand on his arm. "And so do we." Elias placed the doll gently beside him. "Well," he said softly, "that's one toy." The Nutcracker puffed his chest. "We can make dozens before Christmas." The doll curtsied. "Hundreds if we hurry." The soldier saluted. "A whole army of toys." The reindeer yawned sleepily. "Let's aim for dozens." Elias chuckled, truly chuckled, for the first time in years. "All right, my little helpers. We'll take it one toy at a time." The Nutcracker raised his wooden hand. "To Christmas restored." The toys cheered softly. But as the laughter warmed the workshop, Elias noticed something. A faint shimmer near the rafters, like dust motes glowing brighter than they should. "Did you see that?" he whispered. The toys grew still. The shimmer lingered. A soft glow, warm, familiar. Then it drifted down like a falling star and settled near Elias's heart. He swallowed hard. "Mara," he whispered, because somehow, impossibly, the warmth felt like her. The toys looked up. The Nutcracker spoke quietly, almost reverently. "That, Mr. Merrin, is the Christmas magic you thought you lost." Chapter 4. The Secret of the Heartwork. That night, long after the lamps in Northhollow dimmed and the town settled into winter slumber, Merrin's toy workshop glowed like a quiet star on Holly Street. Warm light spilled through its crooked windows, soft and golden, as though the place itself had rediscovered the purpose of its beams and bricks. Inside, Elias sat at the workbench, surrounded by his small, devoted helpers. A doll half finished, a wooden train drying, spools of thread sparkling like candy canes, paint jars shining in tidy rows. The toys were tired, if toys could feel such a thing, but joy radiated from them like warmth from a fireplace. The doll stretched, rubbing the back of her porcelain neck. I didn't know stitching tiny scarves would make me sore. "You don't have muscles," the soldier pointed out. "That doesn't mean I can't feel worn out," she huffed. The reindeer plush curled up beneath the workbench like a sleepy dog. "My stuffing aches," it muttered. The bird perched atop Elias's lamp and preened proudly. "I have energy for another project." The nutcracker, arms folded, shook his head. "We must pace ourselves. There is much to do before Christmas Eve." Elias leaned back in his chair, hands resting gently on his lap. He hadn't felt this peaceful in years. Yet a question prickled softly in the back of his mind. A quiet uncertainty he had pushed down while working, but which now demanded to be heard. He cleared his throat. "My friends," he said gently, "I need to ask something." The toys straightened, curious. "You mentioned earlier that Christmas is fading in Northhollow, that the lights dim, the laughter lessens." He paused. "But why did you wake now? Why not last year? Or the year before?" The toys exchanged glances, tiny, meaningful glances full of hesitation. Finally, the nutcracker stepped forward. "Because the heartwork is weakening." Elias blinked. "What is the heartwork?" The workshop grew still. Even the fire in the stove seemed to quiet itself. The nutcracker took a thoughtful breath for a toy with no lungs. "The heartwork," he explained softly, "is the magic that binds this workshop, Mr. Merrin. It was woven the moment you opened it, long ago. Woven by your hands, your laughter, your kindness, and hers." He looked toward the corner where Mara's old rocking chair sat. Empty now, but never forgotten, Elias felt the sting of memory behind his ribs. "Mara and I," he whispered, "we built this place together." "Exactly," said the soldier. "Your joy built it, her warmth fed it, and every child who ever held one of your toys helped it grow." The porcelain doll clasped her tiny hands over her heart. "The heartwork is not a spell. It's not something magical in the ordinary sense. It's the love stored inside every toy you ever made." The reindeer raised its head, and when Mara passed and you stopped creating, the heartwork dimmed. Elias shut his eyes. He could feel it, like a soft breeze warming old embers. "So all this time," he whispered, "the workshop has been growing weaker because I grew weaker." The toys didn't correct him, but their silence said enough. "We didn't wake earlier," the nutcracker said gently, "because we couldn't. Not until the heartwork called us, and it only called when you began to miss your old joy more than you feared your grief." Elias swallowed hard. "I did miss it," he whispered. "I missed feeling alive." The nutcracker nodded, and that longing rekindled the heartwork, just enough for us to wake. The bird fluttered onto Elias's shoulder, nuzzling him with a wooden beak. "We've been waiting for this moment for a long time." Elias placed a trembling hand over the bird's tiny form. Then, "The heartwork is fragile." "Yes," the doll said sadly, "but it can grow stronger again." "How?" Elias asked. The nutcracker raised his chin. "By finishing what was left undone." Elias blinked. "Undone?" The Nutcracker gestured toward the top shelf, toward the half-finished Nutcracker toy that had spoken first. The toy Elias had abandoned in grief. "You started me before Mara fell ill," the Nutcracker said softly. "You were building me for the Christmas Eve window display. I was the toy you meant to finish together." Elias felt his breath catch. He remembered. The emerald paint Mara had helped choose, the tiny brass buttons she had polished, the smile he had carved with her humming beside him. He had set the toy aside the day she could no longer sit in the workshop. He had never touched it again. The Nutcracker's voice was gentle. "I woke because I was the thread tying you both to the Heartwork, and you never cut that thread, even when you thought you had." Elias looked down at his hands, trembling not from pain now, but emotion. "So you're saying, to restore Christmas, to restore the workshop, I have to finish you?" The Nutcracker nodded solemnly. "Yes, but not alone." The soldier saluted. "We'll all help." The doll curtsied. "We know every detail of her work. She knitted love into these walls." The reindeer puffed proudly. "And I can fetch anything you need." The bird hopped onto the Nutcracker's shoulder. "And I can keep you steady." The workshop felt warmer than the stove could ever explain. Elias wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "All right," he whispered. "Then we'll finish you. Together." The toys cheered, soft tinkling sounds like wind chimes in winter. But then a gust of cold wind rattled the windows so sharply that all movement stopped. The lantern outside flickered. The stove dimmed. The air grew thin and trembling. Elias looked toward the door. A shadow moved across the frosted glass, slow, heavy, deliberate. Not a villager, not a child passing by. Something else. The toys huddled close. The Nutcracker's painted eyes narrowed. "The Heartwork is awakening, which means others may sense it too." Elias swallowed. "Others?" The soldier turned toward the door. "Someone, or something, has noticed the magic returning." A knock echoed through the workshop, deep, hollow, like a fist made of wind and winter boom. Boom, boom. The toys froze. Elias gripped his cane. The Nutcracker stepped forward. "Mr. Merrin," he said softly, "whatever stands at that door isn't coming for a toy." Elias stared at the trembling door. His heartbeat drummed in his ears. "What is it coming for?" The Nutcracker looked back at him. "The Heartwork." Chapter 5. The Visitor of Winter's Edge. The workshop fell so silent you could have heard a snowflake land. The toys clustered together atop the workbench and shelves. The soldier with his wooden chest puffed out bravely, the porcelain doll gripping the reindeer plush's antler, the bird perched with wings half spread in alarm. Only the Nutcracker stood beside Elias, chin raised, tiny boots planted in a stance that was far more courageous than his small size suggested. Elias stared at the door. Frost crept along the edges of the window pane, not drifting gently as frost should, but growing, threading outward in jagged, unnatural branches. The lantern outside flickered, its flame struggling against the sudden surge of wind. The knock came again. Boom, 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 not angry, not violent, but insistent, as if the winter itself was asking to be let in. Elias felt his heart thump painfully beneath his ribs. His fingers tightened around his cane until his knuckles went white. "Nutcracker," he whispered. The toy lifted its chin. "Whatever comes, Mr. Merrin, we face it together." The soldier saluted sharply. "Together." The doll nodded, trembling but determined. "Together." Even the reindeer, though quivering, stepped forward. We won't let anything take the Heartwork. Elias swallowed hard. His workshop, the place once filled with warmth and laughter, now felt both sacred and vulnerable. The glow of the stove dimmed, casting long shadows across the carved toys. The knock came a final time. Then, silence. The nutcracker turned slowly toward Elias. "Open it." Elias hesitated. It could be dangerous. The nutcracker nodded. "All things worth loving are." Elias drew a shaky breath and stepped toward the door. His cane tapped the floor. His boots creaked on the old wooden boards. The cold seeped through the cracks, nipping at his ankles. He reached out. His hand trembled. He steadied it. And then he unlatched the lock. The door blew open with a swirl of icy wind, scattering snowflakes into the workshop like a rush of glittering ghosts. Elias shielded his face. The toys braced themselves, and then a voice, soft, old, and weary, drifted through the cold. "Elias Merrin, you still keep the lights burning later than any man in Northhollow." Elias froze. Standing in the doorway was old Tomlin Frostwell, the ancient watchman of the Northhollow district. Cloaked in heavy woolen layers, beard white as snow, lantern dim at his side, boots thick with frost. But this wasn't the kindly, slightly clumsy watchman who told long stories at the town square. No, Tomlin looked different tonight. His lantern flickered with an unnatural bluish glow, and frost clung to his eyebrows and coat in delicate patterns that resembled runes, symbols Elias didn't recognize. The toys shrank back. Only the nutcracker held his ground. Tomlin stepped inside, each boot print spreading frost that crackled across the floor before fading. "Tomlin," Elias murmured, "what in heaven's name—" Tomlin stuck out a hand. "Close the door, boy. The night's listening." Elias, startled by the urgency, quickly shut the door. Wind rattled it once before retreating into the frozen darkness. Only then did Tomlin turn his lantern toward Elias, and the toy workshop, the bluish glow cast eerie, dancing shadows across the shelves. The toys held perfectly still, but Tomlin's eyes paused on each one, as if he could sense the life humming beneath their wooden, porcelain, and stuffed forms. "What brings you out in a storm like this?" Elias asked cautiously. "You never leave your watch past dusk." Tomlin exhaled, a long, frosted breath. "The Heartwork," he said softly. "It's waking. I felt it rumbling through the frost." The nutcracker stepped forward, small but fearless. "And what concern is that of yours, Watchman Frostwell?" Tomlin's eyes flicked down, not surprised at all to see a toy speaking. "Ah," he murmured, "so the Heartwork stirred you awake again. Good." He took another step toward the workbench, slow, deliberate, eyes creased with something between sorrow and hope. Elias placed a gentle hand protectively in front of the nutcracker. "Tomlin," Elias said quietly, "if you know about this magic, you must tell me what threatens it." Tomlin set down his lantern on a nearby stool. Its blue light pulsed like a heartbeat. Then he spoke words that chilled the workshop far deeper than the winter wind. "There is a storm coming, Elias, not of wind or snow, a storm of forgetting." The toys huddled closer. The doll gasped. The reindeer whimpered softly. Tomlin continued, "The Heartwork keeps Christmas alive in Northhollow. But when it weakens, the storm approaches. It seeps in slowly, through cracks of sorrow, through years of silence, through hearts closed by grief." Elias's own heart clenched. Tomlin's frost-lined fingers curled around his lantern handle. "And when the Heartwork nearly dies," his voice sank to a whisper, The storm steals the memories Christmas is built on. The soldier's boots clicked sharply. "What does it want?" the soldier demanded. Tomlin's blue-lit eyes swept the room. "It wants the workshop empty. It wants its magic quiet. It wants Northhollow to forget joy, forget warmth, forget what this place has meant for generations." The doll trembled. "But why?" Tomlin's lantern dimmed, because magic unused becomes magic undone. Elias lowered heavily into a chair. His worst fear, the slow dimming he'd felt since Mara died, had a name, a form, a truth. "So what must we do?" Elias whispered. "What must I do?" Tomlin stepped closer and gently placed a frost-cold hand on Elias's shoulder. "You must finish the Heartwork's keystone," he said. Elias blinked. "The Nutcracker," he breathed. The Nutcracker stood taller. Tomlin nodded. "Finish him," he said, "before Christmas Eve, before the storm reaches Northhollow." He turned on his heel and walked toward the door. But just before stepping out into the swirling frost, he added, "And Elias." Elias looked up. Tomlin's weathered eyes glimmered with warm memory. "Your wife believed that Toy would be your masterpiece." And with that, he vanished into the winter night, leaving behind only a faint shimmer of frost and urgency burning in Elias's heart. The Nutcracker turned toward the Toymaker. "Mr. Merrin," he said softly, "we begin at dawn." Elias lifted the half-finished Nutcracker from the shelf with trembling fingers. Outside, wind howled, but inside the workshop glowed with purpose. A storm was coming, and the only thing that could stop it was a toy that held all the love of Christmas inside it. Chapter 6: The Christmas Dawn That Found Its Way Home. The dawn of Christmas Eve arrived not with fanfare, but with a quiet silver glow that blanketed Northhollow in peaceful light. The storm of forgetting still loomed at the horizon, an unseen presence, a hush beneath the usual winter sounds, but inside Merrin's toy workshop, warmth pulsed like a living heartbeat. The toys had worked through the night, not tirelessly, because even magic grows weary, but faithfully. The soldiers' boots were dusted with sawdust. The dolls' ribbons were fraying at the ends from tying so many tiny bows. The reindeer plush had fallen asleep twice before jolting awake to help again, and the wooden bird's small wings sagged from constant fluttering. But no one complained, not even once, because in the center of the workbench lay the unfinished Nutcracker, their keystone, their purpose, the heart of Christmas magic itself. Elias stood over him, candlelight flickering across his tired but determined face. Snow fell softly outside. The world seemed to hold its breath. "We're close," Elias murmured, voice thick with exhaustion and hope. "So close." The Nutcracker, half awake and half asleep from the magic sustaining him, smiled faintly. "Finish me," he said softly. "Not for me, for the workshop, for her." Elias swallowed hard. For Mara. He remembered her humming on winter nights, sitting in the rocking chair by the window. He remembered her hands, warm, gentle, always steady, passing him a brush when his own clumsy fingers were covered in paint. He remembered how she squeezed his hand the day he hung the workshop sign, whispering, "Joy can be made by hand." He had forgotten that truth, but tonight the toys had brought it back to him. He lifted the carving knife. His hands trembled, but the toys steadied them. The soldier braced the handle. The doll whispered encouragement. The reindeer nudged the base. The bird landed lightly on his wrist to still his shaking. Together, slowly, with breath as soft as falling snow, Elias carved the Nutcracker's final smile, a smile that held Mara's warmth, a smile he had begun years ago but never finished, a smile that looked like joy rediscovered. The Nutcracker inhaled sharply, his wooden chest rising with a faint glow. "Now the paint," he whispered. The bird dipped a delicate brush into emerald green. The doll painted the brass buttons to a gleaming shine. The soldier buffed his boots. The reindeer added the tiniest touch of velvet to his coat. Elias watched with something like awe. He realized then that Mara was still here, not just in memory, but in every corner of the workshop, woven into the heartwork itself. "Thank you," he whispered aloud. Outside, wind surged against the windows. The storm of forgetting had reached Northhollow. Frost cracked along the panes, shadows curled along the ground. Lights in the street flickered weakly. The toys stiffened. "It's here," the soldier whispered. The Nutcracker, still unfinished by a single detail, turned toward Elias. "My key," he said softly. "You must wind my heart." On the back of the Nutcracker's coat was a tiny brass keyhole. Elias had carved it years ago, but never turned it. With trembling hands, he picked up the matching brass key. Untouched for so long, it felt like a memory warming in his palm. The workshop rattled, snow blew under the door. Lanterns flickered out. The storm pressed in with silent, terrible force. The toys backed away, eyes fixed on Elias. "Wind it," they whispered. "You must finish him." Elias inserted the key, turned it once. A tremor ran through the Nutcracker's body, turned it twice. Light pulsed around them in a soft ring, turned it a third time, and the workshop exploded with warmth. Not heat, not fire, but pure, unfiltered Christmas magic. A golden wave burst from the Nutcracker's chest, spreading through the workshop like a sunrise pouring through stained glass. The toys glowed, the shelves shone, the old beams hummed with life. The storm of forgetting hit the workshop and shattered like a wave against rock. Frost melted from the windows. Darkness retreated howling into the night. The lantern outside reignited in brilliant gold. Northhollow lit up every home, every street, every heart. Children stirred in their sleep, smiling. Lanterns blazed merrily. The great Christmas tree in the square burst into sparkling light. The Heartwork had awakened. Elias stumbled back, overwhelmed by the glow filling the room. The Nutcracker stood, fully alive, fully carved, fully finished emerald coat gleaming. Boots polished, eyes shining with warmth. He placed his wooden hand on Elias's. "Mara would be proud," he whispered. Elias pressed trembling fingers to his eyes. Tears spilled down his cheeks. "I miss her so much." The Nutcracker squeezed his hand gently. "Christmas doesn't erase sorrow," he said softly. "It lights the path through it." The toys gathered around Elias, the soldier saluting with pride, the doll smoothing her dress, the reindeer nuzzling his leg, the bird chirping gently. Elias looked at each of them, heart full to bursting. "Thank you," he whispered. "You saved my workshop. You saved Christmas." The Nutcracker shook his head. "No," he said, "you did." Outside, church bells began to ring, soft, clear, joyful. Children's laughter echoed through the snowy streets. Families opened windows to see the lights dancing all across town. Northhollow had not felt this alive in years. Elias stepped to the window. Snow drifted lightly, peacefully. The sky glowed soft pink with dawn, and in the frost on the glass, for the briefest, gentlest second, Elias saw Mara's reflection beside his, smiling. He pressed his hand to the glass. "Good night, my love," he whispered. "And Merry Christmas." Her reflection faded like a breath on cold air. The nutcracker climbed onto Elias's shoulder. "What now, Mr. Merrin?" Elias smiled softly, eyes shining. "Now?" He looked around the warm living workshop. "Now we make toys, lots and lots of toys." The soldier cheered. The doll twirled. The reindeer pranced in a small circle. The bird fluttered excitedly. Because Christmas Day had arrived, and Merrin's toy workshop was awake again.